Hello and welcome to our podcast, Practical Considerations for Selecting a PLM System and Implementation Partner. I'm Andreas Lindenthal, founder and managing partner of PLM Advisors. We're a technology neutral and vendor independent consulting firm that specializes in PLM, product lifecycle management, innovation, and new product development. And I'm here with Joseph Frascati. He's a partner with the Strata Fusion Group and a longtime Bay Area technology executives. Hello, Joseph. Welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm glad to have you. So, first, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, experience, etc.?
Sure. Well, I currently am a partner at the Strata Fusion Group. We provide technology services for a range of clients in various industries. We as well are technology and vendor agnostic. And for me personally, I've spent my career on both sides of the company maturity curve, both the post-acquisition of an integration within a larger enterprise, as well as hypergrowth support for startup organizations too.
Great. Thank you. So obviously you've gone through PLM system and vendor selections a few times, right?
Oh no, was that a prerequisite for this? Yeah, so we've done that a number of times. And disclosure for people who are watching, Andreas and I have worked together, which is how we connected. And since we've worked together, we've maintained a business friendship. So that whole thing must have gone well, I guess.
I guess so. Yeah. And I appreciate that partnership for sure. So how was your experience with these vendor selections? I mean, there's dozens of different PLM systems out there, probably hundreds of different system integrators and solution providers, and of course everybody says they're the best, right? And everybody can do the job. So how did you navigate through that overwhelming choice of different systems and vendors?
Yeah, good choice of words. It is overwhelming at first, right? PLM is broad, it's deep. And whether it's PLM, ERP, CRM, name your M, if you will, uh, it's daunting, right? So with any successful program, you want to start by anchoring everything against what is your business strategy, what are your business goals, what are your must-have capabilities that you've got to have over the next several years, what comes in what order, and then start to think about what are your most significant pain points because you can't boil the ocean, and what differentiates you. You may be a company where engineering agility and custom engineering is your how you differentiate yourself in the marketplace, and the way that you may look at your requirements could be different from a company that releases and iterates very little, right, over a period of time. So you really want to look at those things. Once you've done that, you'd be surprised. You'll find that it's actually pretty easy to start deselecting solutions. The other thing is from a technology standpoint, you want to have a this is what happens, everybody, when you do a podcast from your phone and you have to send a call to voicemail. So uh, sorry for my finger there, but you'll find that this deselects a lot of the options for you. The other thing is you really have to be honest with yourself about where are you in terms of your internal knowledge. So in my particular case, it's not uncommon that we call on Andreas or some other company and have a outside third party perspective from somebody who's fairly deep in the industry and can also help us because most of the internal folks in an organization, uh, their experiences are with the tools that they've touched, and sometimes positive, sometimes negative. And that shouldn't preclude an organization from looking at those solutions or other solutions too.
Yes, absolutely. So, as you said, I mean, you didn't wake up one day and just, decide, okay, I want to evaluate and implement a new PLM system for the company. Clearly not. So something, and you alluded to that, led to that decision. Can you describe in, a little bit more specifically the situation and business challenges that brought you and the organizations that you were with to consider a new PLM system?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say if you're waking up from dreaming about PLM, I think you've got a problem. So, but look, these things become quite obvious when you enter an organization. Um, it's you may be confronted with slower release timing than is optimal, or an inability to release iteratively as fast as you need to. Maybe sharing internally or externally could be a problem. And these things are pretty obvious. They come out early if you join an organization and start talking to people about their pain points. And usually the people that are embedded there, they're no shrinking violet when it comes to sharing, what they're going through, right? So I would say uh, the you don't have to dig very far to understand these things. And I would also say that sometimes you have to look beyond just what's going on in a particular function. You really, as a technologist, you've got to look at what's going on with integrations, what's going on with what's happening upstream, and what's going on with happening downstream as well. Because you've got to look at this holistically. But usually those drivers, in my experience, are pretty obvious. The other example could be systems that are just out of support, they're brittle. They may not be causing an operational issue, but it could be a longer term risk.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and again, you kind of talked about you had obviously you had different systems in place, integrations, upstreams, downstreams. What was the state of your existing systems before you started the PLM selection? In my experience, typically there's obviously different business functions involved in PLM. Every business function has kind of their own tools. What was the situation at the companies that you were with?
Yeah, that's a point. That's a great question. Every company almost has their own thumbprint or fingerprint in this area. Sometimes, as I mentioned, it could be like a brittle system that's just posing a risk. You may have lost knowledge, and it's somewhat of a mystery. But if I envision some of the more complicated to steer programs, it's usually there's a number of redundant systems. Uh, the companies I've been with, as we talked about, PLM is wide and deep. So the companies that I've been with have had a tendency to be more focused on the configuration management, CAD, PDM, PLM, and excuse me, BOM management and change control, maybe requirements management. Those seem to be the areas that get the most amount of attention, which makes sense, especially if you're at a young company that's growing. Those are the areas you're really focused on. Um, the There's also the human middle,ware that's going on around all these different systems as well, right? But if you go through discovery, in my case, the more complicated example, there's maybe four, five, six different systems that do similar things, but maybe one team is using PDM and another team is using Dave to manually name files. Maybe you've got one team that has Excel for their change control, and maybe another team has some legacy system that is functional, but the problem is more about the fact that it's not shared by multiple groups. And then there are some things that may start off as looking like they need resolution, and you may or may not decide to integrate those into single platforms. Electrical, right? You can even, and by the way, there's source code for change control and things like that as well. So not everybody is necessarily working within the same discipline. The type of engineering they're doing may not be the same. So you oftentimes have a pretty disparate landscape, and getting all this stuff out and in the open as you're starting to formulate the program helps you then figure out how do you get between that and the point of arrival that you want to be at, and how do you go through the multiple steps needed to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I mean, clearly you had a very diverse collection of different systems, different people working in different tools. And that's not uncommon for companies, right?
No, no.
Companies grow, they acquire maybe and if there's not a strategy, I guess, an IT strategy that combines this all and guides and leads people, then everybody kind of goes off and selects their own tools.
Yeah,
Quality goes off and engineering goes off and manufacturing engineering and purchasing, they all go off and pick their own tools. So, um, on a high level, talking about goals and objectives of a PLM selection, and
Mm.
of course after that implementation as well. Was standardization, was that one of the objectives and goals of the project ultimately?
Well, in from a business process and procedural standpoint, standardization and some degree of centralization is often what teams are looking for to be able to improve throughput or solve certain business challenges and support a scaling business. From a technology standpoint, what I try to do is focus on those business procedures first. There's always going to be an economy of scale or a balance of cost or practicality to fit a system that's more idiomatic to your environment. And so from an IT person's perspective, you're going to have your preferences in terms of on-prem cloud integration types, just the maturity of technology, things of that nature. Those things are important, but I would always evolve any technologist and tech leader, uh, lead with the business function and let the other pieces follow. It's your job to figure out how to support those things. If using some influence towards standardization of technology is worth it, do it. But overall, standardization, I think, should start at the functional level, and that's more how you achieve a consistent product. If you don't, frankly, however many years later, when you're promoted to customer because the issues are still not resolved, the next person who's going to come in is just going to go, boy, those people didn't know what they were doing. They didn't work towards getting you towards standardization. So, but again, not everybody, standardization doesn't necessarily mean everybody uses the same tool. The technology roadmap should result from where the business needs to go.
Right. So you clearly said, I think it's very critical to determine what the desired outcome of an implementation is before we even start the selection.
Yeah.
What do you want to achieve with a PLM project, right? Do you want to have an engineering tool? Do you want to have an enterprise-wide PLM solution? Do you want to integrate different functions? Or again, as you said, maybe give different parts of the business a little bit more independence, and integrate different tools. Sorry. Um,
Hmm.
so that will clearly narrow down the choice of tools, obviously, that you're going to look at in an implementation or in the selection. Sorry. Um, And of course, that will also determine the level of investment and the commitment required from an organization, right? So
Yeah.
in one instance, we're talking about a purely engineering data management solution where engineering is involved. In other instances, we're talking about if you have an enterprise-wide tool, of course, now you have all parts of an organization involved. You have quality, product development, purchasing, manufacturing, engineering, procurement, yeah, etc. Even maybe sales and support, after sales support, etc. Partners, suppliers, etc. What was your approach with that, in terms of involving people and also the strategy?
Yeah. Well, I'll use the example that you worked with us on. We included everybody in the organization that could conceivably be impacted one way or another, on the upstream or downstream, by PLM business processes at the company. Because we had already done that work of prioritizing, what our goals were over a reasonable horizon, it became pretty clear early on there were some groups that weren't necessarily going to get new functionality in the short term. But we needed their input of strategically, where do you think we need to be, to shape the program? And then also, you want to make sure that from a morale and involvement standpoint, that people feel like they're heard. They're going to be more likely to participate in the things that they're being invited to, even if they're more of a cursory cast member of this whole thing in the short term. So it's really important to do that. The other thing is these programs are, and you could say this about many, right? But they're a time suck. Engineering departments, for example, engineering ops, supply chain management, all those groups, they're big day-to-day operationally critical resources. And so when you plan for something like this, you also want to estimate, the allocation and make sure that these resources are reserved. And that's why a reasonable executive-wide approval process is also helpful because it uh, gets the buy-in and the mandate from above that people are participating as well. But again, it's more of a health thing. If people aren't involved, they tend just to feel like there's no value add for them in the short or long term.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's a balancing act, right? I mean, on the
Yeah.
one hand, you want people to be involved. You need people to be involved in these kind of projects, but at the same time, of course, nobody usually is just doesn't have the daily responsibility and delivering to the client, right? So there's a trade-off. I need to give some time to the project from a business perspective, right? On the other hand, again, I have all my daily responsibilities that remain. So how did you balance that in your situations? How did you get commitment from the people to be there? Because ultimately, in my experience is if there's a project, an improvement project, and there's a client project, usually the client project wins, right? Because there's a
Hmm.
deadline, there's revenue coming in, etc. And on the other side, you have money just going out.
Yeah, it's like you're asking, why do implementations still fail today when theoretically we've known about all the things that make up a quality or a successful implementation? We've known these things for decades now. And I think the reason is things have to get done in terms of new initiatives while you're running the business. And, you know, it can show up in different ways. You can get that baseline agreement that we talk about for commitment, right? Even if you're having conversations about augmentation of staff or things of that nature. Um, but you also have to be realistic. Maybe this isn't going to take, it'll take longer maybe than ideal because you got to be practical about it. During programs, you should budget contingency. You should expect to have issues. Governance is important. People who escalate and don't obfuscate or have a hesitancy to bring up issues. You want to avoid that, and so it's really important that you're adjusting. I can think very clearly of the program we were on. We thought that we would do something in phase one, and it was literally critical customer related re-engineering program. The first group that was supposed to go live got a certain percentage through. It wasn't going to happen, and so we pivoted and changed the approach and went to a group that seemed to have the availability. So all the commitment in the world, even if you're backfilling resources, you still have to have the agility and the steering within a program to be able to adjust to what's going on. But you do need the strength of the executive team to not allow that to happen repeatedly because then your program's blown up. You'll spend a lot of time and money and not get anything for it.
Right, obviously, yeah. And once you engage, the implementation partner and others, and you have the clock running.
That's
You have
right.
the, they're the technical resources on site, and you pay them whether they do something or not, right? Usually, and
Usually.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
I mean, you should
so
be negotiating ways to give short notice for adjustments and things of that nature. But yes, at 100%, money is walking out the door when you've greenlit these programs.
yep, yep, exactly, yep.
Mm.
Yep. So very good point. So, and that leads to another, I think, important part. You talked about phase one, and then presumably, there was phase two and phase three, etc. So, um, it is obviously clearly important to plan how this project is going to look like, even
Mm.
at the time of, again, for the selection, because you want to look obviously for a tool that you can implement incrementally, but ultimately has all the necessary functionality that you need even after whatever you go through phase three and phase four. Not you're implementing a tool that is good for phase one, and in 2 years you find, oh, too bad, whatever we want to do in phase three that the tool cannot do. That
Right.
obviously would be very sad too. So how did you go about building a strategy for and a roadmap for your implementation? What were the kind of the deciding factors for that? And then did you have a strategy? I guess just I'm
Right.
assuming you had one, but yeah,
Sure. Well, independently, a technology leader is going to have some standards that they'd like to achieve and architectural goals that they'd like to get to. When it comes to how do you figure out, I think what you're saying really is like, how do you make sure you're not going to buy an Edsel? Nobody's going to know that reference I just made. A car company that had high hopes and went defunct very quickly. So, and I'm not saying a company necessarily has to go out of business, but you just may find that the things you want to get out of it 2 years later, maybe you're not able to extrapolate that the way you thought. So, back to basics. Did you define your business goals? What are you trying to do as a company in which period of time? What differentiates you? What do you struggle with the most? You've deselected. Now you have a few candidate vendors in place. The reason you do that multi-year roadmap is even though you're going to spend a lot of your time on the short-term needs, you should be spending a portion of your time on those long-term needs. You set this up beautifully, Andreas. You didn't even know it. You talked about getting people on the fringe involved, right? So that they're not introduced to this program blindly 2 years later, right? Get those people involved. Now, listen, you have to have some. You're going to make a rough decision because you don't have time to prove out capabilities that you're going to turn on 2 or 3 years later. But a cursory review will up your chances that you're not going to find yourself boxed into a corner as well.
yeah,
I also think when you do these multi-year roadmaps, have an escape valve for, look, if we find that these modules in this large suite that we're acquiring don't give us the differentiating functionality that we need, we may have to integrate with a third-party tool. But you may be making this decision because that larger platform or more extensible platform gives you some key needs that are non-negotiable, and you're making those assumptions early on, right?
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think, and you're bringing up another really key point. I think it's important to have a plan, but as Clausewitz once said in On War, you have to have a plan. That's really, really important. But once the battle starts, you gotta basically react to what's coming, because you can never exactly predict what the future holds.
Right.
What's going to happen during the battle, right? So again, having a plan is important, but having flexibility to deviate from that plan depending on maybe future acquisitions, may et cetera, et cetera. That's still very, very important to allow for that. For
Yeah,
sure.
and then I'll make one last point, which is, if I mentioned earlier, if you don't necessarily have the expertise internally, leverage some fractional resources at minimum who can help guide you as well, because these are people that have been there, done that. I'm not trying to do like a commercial for PLM advisors necessarily, but this would be the same for almost any functional area. Even though you have experts in your particular field internally, they may not be experts in the marketplace. So do leverage external folks that can help you make more confident decisions as well.
Yeah. And I appreciate that because I mean, typically most companies, for them, obviously they're in the business of developing a product and manufacturing a product. They're not necessarily experts in PLM, right? So
Yeah,
so it does make sense to bring in external people who have that expertise and can
yeah,
guide. Ultimately, you still have to make the decisions yourself, but at least you have some guidance and expert advice.
yeah, for sure.
Certainly that, yeah. Makes sense. Okay, so you basically had your strategy and you defined your goals and objectives. You had your roadmap. You put that together, and then what? Did you go out and just started talking to vendors and look at different PLM systems? What was the approach there then in terms of actual vendor selection?
Yeah, so we did leverage some external folks who could help us with those things. Now, like a lot of companies, we had trouble articulating what we really thought our to be state was going to be, what our end-to-end processes really should be. Different people coming from different perspectives, not in a contentious way, but so we actually brought in a third party to help walk us through a phase zero that was catered to several things. One of them was helping us articulate a bit about how our to be state should look like from an end-to-end process flow perspective. Not too much detail, but a reasonable amount. that equips you better to be able to evaluate software platforms. In addition to that, we made a decision that we wanted more of a customized demo approach, something that would really allow us to get a true feel for how the system works, and for the system to have some real credibility in the eyes of our folks that it can handle some of these things that they've been struggling with. Once you take that approach, you then also get more buy-in and skin in the game from the potential partners that you're talking to. And some of them may opt out once they see, your process flow and where you think you're going and what these things are. Just back to your point about how do you shortlist the people you want to look at, right? And then lastly, this third party helped us, sort of guided us through, hey, if you're going to do demos that are more tailored towards you to make the best decision, then here's some data you ought to start to prepare now, because we're going to give these files to these folks and we're going to make them configure the system and use our data in these key process areas. That could be, and that also means, make sure you know the scenario that you want them to go through. So some of that prep work during phase 0 was us doing a little bit of homework to get ahead of these partners, so we had deliverables for them to then act upon when we started that process.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely just want to go out, right, and say, hey, vendor, ABC, whatever, come and show us, whatever you can do, right?
Oh
Um,
man, I hate so much the standardized demo with the phrases like seamless integration and other nonsensical, and to yeah, in an area this complex, it's really important that, and by the way, engineers, they're kind of smart, kind of tough, kind of show me people, right?
mhm,
If you're
yep.
right, so these are folks that in order for them to be bought in, you really want to go to that level.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So it's important to define use cases. How do we want to use the system in the end, right?
that's right.
Define functional requirements at least. And on a higher level, what is it exactly that the system needs to be able to do? Manage this data, whatever, manage this type of workflow, manage requirements, all these kind of things, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
based on your strategy that you put together and what is included in the project ultimately, in all phases. And then, as you said, I think a very critical point is use your data, right?
Mhm.
Don't don't just say, okay, you're, I don't know, say, what one company I know you worked with was Archer, a really really cool products and vertical, electric, yeah, air taxis,
Yeah.
really really cool things. But if you have a products like this, don't come and show me a toaster, right?
Right.
As a demo, because that has nothing to do with my business. Show me something that is comparable, or even better, as you said, show me based on my own data. Here is an assembly of our vehicle. Please use that to show me or demonstrate how you manage requirements based on that, and how you assemble and how you configure the product, etc. And number one, it takes time for you to gather all that data, define requirements, define the use cases, so that you can ultimately give that to the vendor. But of course, it also takes the vendor some time then to prepare the demos, or you can't do that just, oh, hey, vendor, come in and do that tomorrow, right?
Yeah, true. And you want to enable a healthy process. You want to, when you've shortlisted these vendors, or when you're approaching them to see who wants to participate, let them know the plan.
Yep.
We're going to take this approach, and here's how we're going to make decisions, and maybe set some expectations up front. Like, we're going to have, ultimately, this is we're going to make our people available to you, but ultimately, this is going to culminate in maybe an in-person, 1 week review,
Yep.
right? And boy, I can tell you some of my best memories, both in terms of personal stuff, like just going out after the demos, but also while we were in the room with the vendors. Some of the best memories and I think most revealing aspects of this whole process came to light in that week where we were all in one location and had vendors battling it out. Because they're just, and we did previews to make sure that we weren't going to get a bunch of people together and have them waste their time and have the vendor be stuck on something, right? But even with that, light bulbs go off. Oh, that's how it works. Sometimes for the better, and sometimes like, oh wow, we just found something quirky about this thing that we didn't necessarily expect.
Right. Yeah, and it's probably a learning experience for both, right? It's a learning
Yeah,
experience for you. You see how the systems work, could work potential, but it probably could also often be a learning experience for the vendor. I was like, oh, this is how this is actually done in reality, right? Because I mean, they often
yeah,
a little bit in a bubble. It's like how again how do we configure a toaster, right? But oh no, but
right.
in real world, it's maybe a little bit more complicated. Um,
Yeah, that use case was a company that did a lot of custom engineering per build.
yeah.
And even though, there's some of it was modular, there was a great deal. And, a lot of these baseline products, they give you capabilities, but they don't necessarily have that use case in mind at all times, right? So yeah, that's a great point you made. The vendors were, it was very enlightening, I think, for them to see this.
I bet. Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. All right. So, going back to the actual vendor selection. So, how many different tools did you actually look at in this selection? Did you look at two or did you look at 10? Yeah. Again, there's probably a trade-off between both.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, across just in general, you really want to try to limit this to two, three, four.
Mhm.
In our particular case, I think things became pretty obvious and we down selected to three. And we felt very comfortable with that, which is good. So, that was a fairly easy process for us. I would say do avoid, too many. And the other thing is, when you talk PLM vendor, uh, we're not affiliated with anybody, but you got your Siemens, your PTC, your Dassault, right? Your major players. Maybe you've got some small players that are worth talking to for certain things.
Mhm.
But let's not forget about integrations. Not all these companies build these integrations themselves. Sometimes there's a third party that's sort of partnered with these vendors, and you want to include those people too, because you have to evaluate this whole thing. You don't want to get a certain percentage through the program and then go, oh, shoot, we got to go pick a integration platform to deal with these two things. So don't make assumptions about those things. And then, as I mentioned before, electrical may be a little bit different. Your software code, source control may be a little bit different. So include those things earlier. And then, as a technologist, you got to look at these not only from a capability standpoint, but how are these things being sold? Are they fully hosted cloud options? Are they multi-tenant, single tenant? Are they traditional on-prem products that they're trying to make look like they're born in the cloud products because they're not quite there? You're going to have to make decisions about the underlying technologies and the infrastructure, right? How do you also make sure that you've got good performance if you're doing large models? You may have a network improvement project on your hands in order to make this successful. You may have a laptop upgrade or computer upgrade project on your hands that you need to put into this program as well. So, you really got to think about this thing left, right, and top down.
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. What you say. So number one, it's important from a PLM point of view again that you have a strategy that again you say in a second phase we want to integrate with an ERP system or whatever. That you already in the evaluation you start thinking about, oh, I need an integration tool or platform, as you said, maybe not every PLM system vendor has an integration available to all the different ERP systems. So that's why I think it's very, very important what you're saying
Yeah,
is to keep that in mind. Long term, what are the requirements, and not just look at the PLM tool, look at everything. And
yeah,
then also from an IT perspective, I think that's again is very important that you have a strategy because the PLM project has to fit in with all the other pieces of that's going on and happening in an organization, right? Any
yeah.
other IT projects, and they have to be coordinated. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's very important. So, um, Then okay, so you narrowed it down to about three systems. You looked at, or you said, okay, we're going to look at these three systems. What did you do? Did you basically just go and you know, call the vendor and say, hey, I'm interested in buying a PLM system, or what was your approach to engaging with the vendors?
Yeah, well, usually you have some incumbents that are in-house and you should have a relationship with them, so they should be easier to get a hold of and talk to. And then for the other ones, frankly, yeah, you call them up, you fill out a web to lead form, you see how good the lead response is. By the way, it'll surprise you sometimes, and you start to get these people into the fold. Maybe that's your business applications folks, maybe it's your project team, maybe it's key users, but yeah, you've got to get yourself wired into these folks. In our particular, in that one case that you and I worked with, we actually used you and your people as point people to reach out. It also allowed us to be somewhat shielded so that we not everybody is adept at um, maintaining which flow of information to a vendor is appropriate, and you always want to maintain the advantage come negotiation time. So using somebody with some skills in that area is also helpful.
Yeah, you wanna definitely, you know, manage the what information goes to which vendor, or basically that the same information goes to all vendors and not
Hmm.
that some vendors get some selective, you know, benefits, I guess, additional information, because there may be some, you know, how should I say, allegiance or interest in having that vendor selected on part of the business, right?
Yeah, I
So
would think there's a few fronts. One of them is you don't want people to show their hand in terms of preferences too early, or
right.
actually, frankly, ever. You'll hit a point where you need to make sure, like, you're going to give these companies data, right? So you want your procurement and your legal folks involved in whatever your standard, like MSA or NDR kind of or NDA, excuse me, process is, right?
Right.
But on a regular basis, as you go through this program and people are getting sort of connected with each other, you really want to avoid the ankle biting, the end arounds that these vendors will want to do sometime to try to get internal insight. Because as somebody who really believes in value for dollar, I try to maintain a pretty controlled flow of info to these folks.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important. Yeah, to manage the relationships. Yes, yeah,
Mhm.
for sure. So okay, so you went to the demos, you looked at that, and then ultimately, you know, you selected a system. Of course, I'm sure that was also based on, you know, functionality, based on price. What would you say, you know, how much of a role did price play? Um, I know it's a little bit a tricky question, but um, the reason is, you know, I mean, obviously you're not going to select the cheapest system if it doesn't meet your requirements, right? You really want to make sure that first of all the system meets your requirements, and then you look at the price. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, the considerations there? What how you weight those two, I guess, criteria?
Yeah, sure, sure. I think I would separate. The cost estimation is really important. You're swagging in the beginning of these things, so you don't want to underestimate, because you're going to create a panic situation when it comes to approval time. So you want to be conservative at first. But what I really suggest, especially on the technology side, don't pad things up too much, because then you make things look like they're a much bigger program
Hmm.
than they really are, as big as they are, and then you create reticence for people to want to approve. So, try to do a 20, maybe a plus or minus 20%
Yeah.
kind of an approach. But uh, when I look at things like software, start off with, hey, listen, you're going to give me list pricing. I
Mm.
have to create a cost model, and you're going to have to help me with how this thing is sold per user, concurrent, uh, who knows, right? There's a mix of commercialization options for these products, and so you got to pick one, create a model for every piece of technology involved, estimate your usage if something is usage based, and that kind of gives you a rough idea. Now, when you start to get closer, that's where that control of information is a bigger deal, because you just don't want anybody to think that they're a runaway favorite, because that happens. Sometimes by the time you get to demo, you kind of know, and the internal folks already have some pretty passionate preferences potentially by that point in time as well.
Yes.
So you always always want to make a vendor feel like you could very easily go in another direction or you're going to go in another direction.
Yeah.
And in my case, I'm transparent. Usually it's in a startup org. And I say, we need you to help invest in us because we're cash strapped. Maybe we'll do another series soon. Maybe we'll have a liquidity event at some point, but like for a major cash infusion, but that may not be for a while. So I'm sure it's a whole other episode to talk about how to maximize pricing. But I would say on the software side, use some simple techniques to make them feel like they could lose this deal is kind of the simple side of it.
Yeah.
But hey, there's a huge part of your cost model that you don't want to forget about. Services,
Yeah.
right? People that are going to help you implement and configure this thing. People that can help you enhance this thing post go live. If you're not going to be, if your model or your choice is to not staff expertise within your organization to execute those projects, you may want managed services for the administration of this thing, right? Some you want to do internally, maybe some you don't. And then there's an infrastructure portion of this, hosting, infrastructure management, uptime, availability, patching, back-end upgrades, things of that nature. So you've got to estimate your implementation as well as your potential, or not potential, but as well as your recurring costs on an annual basis. That way you don't have surprises later. It's easier to do multi-year budgeting and estimation and things like that. And then when it comes to negotiating for these services, you should have people within your organization that can smell pricing and kind of tell you inflated, not inflated. And then, people like yourselves, they're privy to a lot of deals. And while they won't reveal specifics about another customer and things that are private to them, they can, give you a bit of a sniff test and say, this is really good. It's aggressive. It's not. And that can give you, more of an indicator that you push a little bit harder.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you just made a great pivot, so we're talking about software vendor selection, right? But of course, as you said, in a PLM project, software is just one part, and it's maybe 50% of the cost, 40%, whatever. Another very important, significant part is the services, the implementation of the tool and the ongoing support of the
Yeah.
tool, whatever you're selecting.
Yeah.
So what did you do there? Did you just automatically go with whatever software vendor there was, and then you use their implementation service, or what did you do?
Every software, and this is across any space, PLM, ERP, or anything else. Some software companies have their own implementation services. Some have a reputation of doing it well. Some have a reputation of doing it very poorly, and they're really not an option that you want to take. Oftentimes, they are aligned to service providers, and they're referring business to these service providers, and sometimes it's based on maybe the industry that you're in or the unique qualities of the needs that your organization may have. So they're a great resource to be able to suggest these things. Now, what does happen is uh, no single service provider can really scale to satisfy the implementation demands of a software vendor entirely. So there's somewhat of a flavor of the month kind of thing that happens where they kind of help position a vendor, and then after a while they're pretty much maxed out, and then they'll start to help and invest and provide referrals to other vendors. So try to know where they are in that particular curve. Leverage your third party, your PLM advisors or maybe anybody else that's unbiased as well. And you may have vendors already that you've worked with. And of course, suggestions can come from people within your own org that they've worked with. But if I hone in on PLM, a lot of these vendors, the choices become abundantly clear pretty quickly. If you talk about Dassault, they have they do not, at least when I worked with them on a particular program, they were not directly doing sales or implementation. They were relying heavily on, at least in the United States, I should say. In the US, they were relying heavily on a partner for sales, and they were relying heavily on that same partner for implementation, even though there were some other authorized implementation partners. The other big candidate that we were looking at did not do their own implementation, and so the partnership on who you would use was very clear there as well.
Yeah. So you basically you did a vendor selection, software vendor selection, and separately you basically also did an implementation partner selection.
That is a wrinkle that I'm glad you brought up because I don't think I articulated this, that should happen very early in the process. And in the same way that you're roughing out the cost of this program in your early stages, your discovery stages, you should have similar conversations with these potential partners as well. And if you have, maybe at one to two to three that you feel some affinity for, engage them in this process as well.
Hmm.
Yes, they're going to be competing against one another. So what? And you and the people on the team can start to get a feel for who do they really feel has the culture um, for them. And in the same way that we try to quantify the decisions around software selection, we didn't spend too much time on it, but we had a multi-tab spreadsheet and a scoring process, and that's how you quantify and make people feel comfortable and confident in the software decision that they're making. But we had a similar process for the implementation partners as well, and it's a little bit less quantifiable. And I remember some of those conversations with some key folks in the functional departments. And the conversation becomes a very soft about who do we like, who's just responsive. What's the culture of these folks?
Yep.
The other thing I try to say is to these companies is don't do the bait and switch on me. If you're going to put somebody to represent your company that's involved, don't make them a pure sales or like sales and engineering resource. Get somebody that you think could be allocated to the project because we may bond, and that could be part of the selection process. And we are going to be, unhappy campers if you pull those people away from us
Yeah, I think
for
that's
implementation.
absolutely. I think that's a critical point. You buy from people, right? You don't buy from companies. So if they bring a person to the evaluation process, to the conversations, they better be involved after that, because again, as you said, you may bond with them, you may like them, you have a relationship with them, and if they go off and yeah, never been seen again, then all of a sudden you have to work with someone that you absolutely do not connect with. That can already be a challenge for the project.
Yeah. Spoiler alert for folks that are earlier in their career and haven't been through this. You may select a partner and they will go and hunt for people on LinkedIn and other available sources to 1099 them and put them on your project because and economically they can't necessarily maintain a large staff of people who are available based on your schedule, right?
Absolutely.
So the sooner you start to play that game of I need your best people. Let's talk about availability, things of that nature. They'll see that. They'll respond to it. They
Yep.
may make a business decision that if they think that they can win this deal, that they'll allocate some good resources to it that they think they can allocate for you post go live
Yeah, absolutely.
or
Of
sorry, post decision.
course, decision, right? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
of course. All right. Well, we're already pretty advanced in our time. I'm sure we could go on here for quite a long time talking about this topic, but I think we have to conclude. So, do you have any parting thoughts, advice for the audience? Anything, yeah, just a recommendation, something that they really should do in a vendor selection.
In vendor selection, don't dictate. People need to be heard. They need to feel bought in.
Yeah.
These projects are hard. They're going to take nights and weekends.
Hmm.
And you don't want people to begrudging the fact that they have to do this. The other thing, have good governance. Don't close your eyes as an executive team and expect to open them 6 months later and have something that's swimmingly going well. Uh, have a cadence and promote transparency about issues and risks because you're gonna have them. And you will walk out of a well-run program a very tightly bonded team. But if you just expect things to go well and you have issues too late in the game, then now the finger pointing and now all the other issues. Those are my initial thoughts. And my last one would be, get a helmet. It's it's a contact sport. These are big projects. They're hard, but extremely rewarding, and they can really empower your business.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Joseph. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much for all your insights and I guess from a practical perspective, advice. And of course, I want to thank our listeners for your interest in our podcast and attending today or listening to it. And please visit plmadvisor.com for more podcasts and other PLM insights from our site. With that, I want to say goodbye. And of course, we will have look out for future podcasts in the topic of PLM innovation and new product development. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.